Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry, my video is not working. I guess a slightly older computer it does not agree with Vowel. So, but hope you can hear me okay. I am Michael Murray. I am based in Washington State. I run a nonprofit called Mission Data Coalition, and we're all about getting access to customer energy data that's held by both electric and gas utilities. And I'm going to be talking today about both some good news and some bad news as far as the national landscape of what data is available where from which utilities. If you're, an entrepreneur in this space, you know that this is a really big problem. It's very difficult and expensive and time consuming to accommodate all the idiosyncrasies of different utilities in different areas. So trying to have some sort of unified, nationwide product to reach a larger market is a challenge. And so I'm sort of busy, day in and day out, trying to stitch together this patchwork of different state policies around access to data. And so I'll just plan to present for about 15 or 20 minutes or so, and then really look forward to your questions and feedback in the latter half of the session. So Mission Data started about 10 years ago. I'm proud to say that there's about 36 million electric meters nationwide that have a mandate for data portability, meaning that a customer can direct their utility to send the information on their behalf to any third-party entity, be it energy management firm, heat pump installer, a water heater that's trying to optimize around your rate, or a virtual power plant. So it's all the same type of data sharing infrastructure that's in the background. And this has been a fight. It's been a battle. We can talk about the reasons why, but a lot of not all, but a lot of the utilities have sort of opposed customer access and control over their own information. And my own background is that I was a co-founder and CEO of Lucid, an energy management startup for commercial buildings. And I spent the first 10 years of my career basically installing a lot of sub-meters, going into the basements of commercial buildings and offices and K-12 schools and colleges and universities and corporate offices, and putting in meters because we couldn't get the data from the utility. And that was very, it was a cold blanket on this optimistic vision that I had about how smart meters were just gonna, open up this range of economic opportunity for so many different people. And I've been essentially, picking at this issue ever since, in large part because I was disappointed when I was living in Oakland about PG&E's, the gap between PG&E's rhetoric and reality as far as what access to information was going to be available. And it's a similar story that's been repeated in other states as well. So what I'm interested in as an advocate is this simple idea of a customer granting permission to share their data with anyone they want to. It could be for an itemized list of prioritized energy efficiency measures in their house. It could be for to receive alerts where you could save money or potentially participate in wholesale market programs as a result of behavioral or automatic device control. And regardless of what it is, my view is that it's the customer's information, and whether you're on a tablet, on your couch, you're on your cell phone, you're on a desktop computer, whatever it is, you should be able to log into your utility's website and say, hey, I want this information transferred somewhere else. And that's something that a lot of the utilities are not too pleased with for reasons we can talk about. But a couple of other use cases that you may be interested in that follow quite naturally from the APIs that facilitate this are, one, if you wanted to share your what rate you're on with the devices or appliances in your house, it would be exactly the same type of process that you see here on the screen. So if I wanted my water heater, my EV charger to find out what rate I'm on so that they have, the peak periods right, the, on peak to off peak ratios right, all that sort of stuff. It really should just be as simple as possible. One of my, mantras is that, we can't, the energy transition cannot depend on educating people and giving everyone, PhDs in rate design and utility cost analysis and all these other arcane topics. It needs to be just push button and you're done. So one thing I'd like to talk about in the context of energy data portability is this global context. So there are tons and tons of really large companies, small companies, and others in various different sectors all around the world who are working successfully on data portability, and it's all driven by the ethos that the customer should be in control, the citizen should be in control of their own information. So whether we're talking about the data transfer project with the tech giants, or open banking or PSD2 in the European Union, this is around financial services data, getting your information out of banks and to other institutions, or budgeting apps, for example, or even your health records. There's tons and tons of progress that has been made on this, and my main point here is this is not a technical problem. This is a political problem. So the reason why the data transfer project exists is because European regulators said we want competition in social media, and so we want everyone's online profiles and friends and contacts and other things to be shareable, so that if people wanted to shop for a service that was more privacy protective, they could do so. And so the data transfer project was initiated. Apple is also a participant. Their logo is not on here, and it works. You can share your information between these different companies, and so it just puts in stark contrast what a lot of the utilities cite as their arguments for why they couldn't possibly share any of your information, because there'd be cybersecurity concerns, or there'd be these privacy violations that would just be, horrendous. And if there's a single instance where a customer is harmed because their energy data went to a bad actor, then the whole project will have, been, rendered, a failure. And I think it's just, it's always good to remind ourselves that there's much more sensitive information, health data, banking data, et cetera, being transferred here. And, there's not a lot of issues with that. Again, because you're putting the customer in control of it. So I'm going to start with a little bad news before I get to the good news. So the bad news is that the United States and the federal government in particular have been really awful on data portability in the energy sector. We're one of the few advanced economies in the world that does not have any sort of federal privacy or data portability policy. And particularly with regards to energy, the US government in 2010 to 2014 dispersed about $3 billion with the Recovery Act to utilities in order to really kickstart the first deployment of advanced metering across the country. And so there were about 17 million smart meters that were funded. 77 utilities received this money. And I went back recently and analyzed what was the data sharing or of data availability status from the 77 recipients of federal funding. And as you can see, the results are pretty sobering. Essentially, only one utility out of the 77, and this is Fort Collins Utilities, actually provides both an API for historical usage data and real-time usage data off of the meter using a Zigbee wireless connection. And this is in large part because the United States government didn't require any sort of data portability. They were eager to spend the money as fast as possible. The global economy was in free fall, and they just thought, well, maybe utilities will do the right thing, and we don't really need to think about it very much. If you go back and you read some of the utilities reports about how they spent the federal money, they have these very glowing depictions of how they connected all of these consumer devices, and customers are able to access and use their information. And that sounded very nice, but then 10 years later, essentially most of those capabilities have been deactivated. Of the roughly 16.4 million meters for which we were able to gather their sort of deployment and data sharing status, only 14.3% offered an API. The majority of that, by the way, is a Centerpoint in Texas. They're part of the Smart Meter Texas system. And then as far as real-time usage data, 97% of those meters had those capabilities deactivated by utilities. So that made me really mad, and I think it should make everyone upset who cares about this space. So some good news is that finally the federal government is starting to make some changes. There's both carrots and sticks. So on the stick side, the Inflation Reduction Act, you probably are all familiar with, the solar and wind subsidies and things like that. One program you may not be aware of is called HOMES. It's the whole home efficient rebate program. I forget exactly what it's a poorly done acronym, but it's a very exciting program. $4.3 billion for measured or modeled energy efficiency. And so you really need to show, based on real data, how much energy is being saved in a home before you're eligible for payment. And so the 4.3 billion is dispersed to the states. The state energy offices are the ones in charge of this. And as you can see here, the SEO is State Energy Office. The legislation says that they shall use open source advanced measurement and verification software as approved by that's the Secretary of Energy, for determining and documenting monthly and hourly weather normalized energy usage of a home before and after the implementation of a retrofit. And so this is going to be a significant driver of demand for energy usage data. We're talking, some states are getting, anywhere from 30 to $150 million or more. There's a lot of excitement around this. This could really help, especially low and moderate income folks cut their energy bills and have more comfortable homes. But you only get the rebate if you can verify it against your energy usage history. And so some utilities will, probably complain about this and say, oh, it's difficult, we can't do it, it's too expensive, et cetera. And that's where the carrots come in. So on the right side, the IIJA, that's the bipartisan infrastructure law, which passed in 2021, as November of 2021. That put $3 billion into U.S. Department of Energy smart grid grants. And one of the requirements is the sentence here that DOE will require projects to support data standards such as Green Button Connect. We'll talk about that. In interoperability and non-discriminatory data access on a real-time basis. The federal government will pay for 50% of the costs of utilities to implement this data sharing infrastructure. So if it costs, $3 or $4 million for a large utility to do it, 50% of the cost will be shared by the federal government. So these are some great signs that we're finally getting some federal participation here on data portability. Another good news story that I wanted to mention, it has to do with a new round of smart meters. The federal government is also going to be supporting these nationwide. If you all are familiar with smart meters or think about them, I would definitely encourage you to learn more about this, because version 2.0 is a significant change from version 1.0. And version 1.0, generally speaking, about what was deployed, roughly over the last 10, 15 years or so. So not your father's smart meter. They come with Wi-Fi built in and an app store. And the app store raises all sorts of interesting questions about how your devices or appliances, your mobile phone, could interact with your smart meter in ways that some use cases have been defined now, but there's a whole lot of creativity that's out there, and we may find new ways for those to interact. And the question is really, in my mind, is a legal and a political one, which is what are the conditions under which entrepreneurs and innovators can write apps and get customers with these new smart meter capabilities. And essentially, what will the utilities allow, and what will the utilities be forced to provide? So let me show you a couple of the contrasts between sort of version 1 of the smart meter and version 2, because I think this is really important. The traditional smart meter will measure energy, 15-minute, 30-minute, 60-minute intervals. That's all pretty well understood at this point. The newer ones, though, because of the computer that's on board, they could measure it at, say, 10 kilohertz, or potentially even more frequently than that. And what that allows you to do is potentially much more accurate statistical disaggregation. So some of the disaggregation accuracy based on 15-minute usage data is kind of like a coin toss. Like, it's really hard to identify specific loads or appliances just because your signal to noise ratio is very low when you're talking about a reading every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes. But if you're sensing it 10,000 times a second and you have access to voltage information too, there's signatures that individual motor loads will have on when they turn on, and that's really, really, really interesting. And so instead of just having a general recommendation on the left side, like, looks like your heating system needs attention, you could potentially give customers very specific actionable advice, like your living room lights are on. And that's something that's only possible with this newer technology. Again, the promise is there, but the question is, who can write these apps, under what conditions, what are the terms, what are the costs associated with doing that. And this is just a quick reference to Stanford University study, which, not surprisingly, found that as your sample frequency of energy usage data increases, your disaggregation accuracy also significantly increases. And so without the cost of additional submeters or anything like that, if you're in this sort of 10 kilohertz band, you might be able to uniquely identify 20 to 40 different appliances inside the home, just based on inference alone. So things like, it looks like your computer is on. It looks like, your 30% of your electric bill is due to this thing or that thing. And you could imagine, the load shifting benefits of this, analyzing the potential for a customer to participate in a virtual power plant, could be extremely enhanced by having access to this information. And then lastly, these smart meters are going to be deployed nationwide. This is my sort of back of the envelope math. 55 million will be deployed by 2030. So we're talking about roughly a third of the United States will have these by the end of the decade. Some will be in 2025, and those are the darker blue states. Some of those states, like Texas, have actually, they installed smart meters 14 some odd years ago, and it's coming time to replace version 1.0 with version 2.0. A lot of the lifetimes are only about 15 or 20 years. And so that's the same thing in California, Pennsylvania, these large states where there were, 7, 8, 9, 10 million meters deployed. Those will be turning over by the end of the decade as well. So it's pretty exciting. The cost of Wi-Fi and these processing power has really just dropped to a level where it's, according to some of the manufacturers, it's comparable now to some of the existing smart meter 1.0 costs. So I said, in the beginning, a lot of what's exciting here is not technical problems. These are there are some exciting technical challenges like desegregation, but fundamentally it's a political issue. And this is why, advocates like myself, do this every day, because we want to create the conditions under which, innovation is fostered and not, snuffed out just because of, a utility that was trying to, pull the wool over regulators' eyes and prevent the distributed energy future from happening. So Um, Fair competition. Fair competition is the name of the game in terms of policy. And let me run through a couple scenarios here to illustrate what I mean by that. So, what apps are allowed on a meter? We've heard some utilities say that no one is allowed to write an app except for whoever the utility chooses. That there could be some legitimate arguments for that. There could be some illegitimate arguments for it. But the utility could very well play a sort of gatekeeping role, just like we're familiar with Apple and Google having a gatekeeper role over their app stores. Imagine, if the utility only liked certain apps that served the utility's interest, but not necessarily your interest as a consumer. So there could be a conflict there. Um, can I choose my preferred disaggregation app? Disaggregation accuracy will improve over time. What if some people have, Google Assistant in their home. Some people have Amazon. Some people, have none of the above. They just have a smartphone. Am I being pushed into, using the utility's preferred disaggregation app to enter their walled garden, or am I going to have choices around that? And what types of choices will those be? On the Wi-Fi front, who has access to the Wi-Fi? Just because there is Wi-Fi on the meter doesn't mean that the utility will allow anything to connect to it. Just like we saw with the Zigbee-based meters that the federal government helped pay for over the years, a lot of those utilities were highly selective in which devices they would allow to connect, and then eventually 97% of them just turned off that capability altogether. So it's not a given that there will be open, non-discriminatory access on Wi-Fi. One proposal from a utility, which I've sort of codenamed here, Acme Electric, they made a straight-faced proposal to that their mobile app would be the only way that you could ever access your real-time energy usage data. And of course, this is a slap in the face to consumers who use all sorts of different technologies. There could be, your inverters on a solar system might want to have access to that. Your electric utility may not like rooftop solar for various reasons, but does that mean that they should inhibit your access to this data in a way that's beneficial to you, but not beneficial to the utility? So these are really interesting policy questions that are under this rubric of fair competition. And then also, yes, self-preferencing. So to my point about utilities, saying, well, I mean, my mobile app is the only app that can connect. There have been cases where utilities have said the only way that you can access your information is by paying $1.99 a month to our affiliate to let you manage this into smart, basically a smart home ecosystem that is half owned by the utility. And is that fair, right? I would say no, but these are the questions that a lot of utility regulators are going to have to face in the next few years. So yeah, who's going to be able to write an app? Here are just some examples of different companies, different members of ours that are writing, have really interesting applications. And what happens if the utility is acting in a discriminatory basis and picking winners? So finally, some good news. So we've definitely been here before, and I love coming back to the telecommunications analogy because I find it just so incredibly helpful and descriptive of some of the challenges that we're facing right now. We are like the telco industry in the 1950s in this respect. So there's a very famous Hushaphone case in the U.S. This, where AT&T, Ma Bell was reigning supreme, and this guy invented a device called a Hushaphone, which would connect onto the telephone network. And basically, AT&T sued him and said, no, you can't connect it. AT&T is the only entity that's allowed to use things that involve the telephone network. But this guy was making money. AT&T didn't like that he was making money, and so they went after him. And what happened was eventually went through the courts, and Hushaphone won. And the key phrase here in the legislation, or excuse me, in the court decision, is that the customer has a right to reasonably use his telephone in ways which are privately beneficial without becoming publicly detrimental. So if you're not harming the electricity system, you should be able to do what you want with your data, right? If you're not harming the telephone network, I should be able to connect whatever device I want onto that. And you run through the Carter phone decision in the 60s, and then eventually acoustic couplers, and you get to the innovation of modems and data over telephony, and eventually the broadband network, in large part because the AT&T monopoly was pushed out of the way. And that's, again, it involves politics, it involves court battles, those types of things. But if it were not for the Hushaphone and Carter phone decisions, we might not have, broadband is not an inevitability. It wouldn't have happened the way that it did. And so I think about this in the context of energy and energy usage data all the time. It shouldn't really matter what I want to use the data for, to be involved in a virtual power plant, to get paid from Ohm Connect, to earn extra leaves on my Nest, whatever it is. Those don't necessarily involve the utility. Maybe they do, maybe not, but it should be my right and my choice to decide what happens with that information. So I will leave it there, and thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the discussion.
Cool, thanks, Michael. That's great. Anyone, if you have questions, just as usual, unmute yourself and shout.
Yeah, hi,
Great.
Justin.
Hi, thanks. That was really, really helpful and interesting. Just a silly technical question. How does the data get from the smart meter back to the utility?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So there's two radios generally in North American meters. One radio is the Zigbee or the Wi-Fi that's just for the in-premise use, and the utility doesn't get that information at all. The other way is through a radio network. It's generally not exclusively a proprietary radio. A lot of utilities, for the folks with like telecom background, you might be saying like, why are the utilities building their own network? Shouldn't they just use public cellular? Shouldn't they just use, like their telco companies that do this for a living? Why would the utility reinvent the wheel? And the reason is CapEx. So utilities make money on capital expenditure. And so they make more money if they build their own network as opposed to using someone else's, like a public cellular, which is treated as a cost. They don't earn a rate of return on that. So anyway, if you talk to Europeans about this, they just sort of laugh. They're like, oh, like, of course, the the way the incentives are aligned, of course, they're going to try to build their own networks. Is that a good for society? Yeah, I don't know. It's a complex question, but that's generally the norm in North America.
Okay, great, thanks. And on the slide that mentioned the IRA homes and the other program, I wasn't quite sure who's doing the work for each of those, especially the IRA homes one. Who is that money going out to do the work?
Yeah, it's a good question. That we don't have the guidelines yet from the U.S. Department of Energy. They might come next month. They might come in August. We're not really sure. It's admittedly a complex program, and so the guidelines are going to be really important in telling the state energy offices how they can use the money, and sort of what flexibility do they have within what Congress dictated. And so the initial how everyone thinks it's going to work is that there will be a set of qualified contractors, and those contractors would sell a customer on some sort of energy efficiency retrofit, and then they would provide the state energy office with basically the customer's address, a little bit of information about what measures they're doing in the building, and then the before and after energy usage. And then if there's savings according to this open source advanced measurement verification software, which we're waiting to see what DOE says on that, then you'll get paid. And the rebates are pretty significant for especially for low income or people under the area, under 80% of the area median income. They're pretty generous. So the thought, at least the theory legislatively, was that instead of just giving out rebates for widgets, this would really incentivize high performance. So the contractors that really do the best work and the best job will be rewarded, and they'll be able to share in that rebate with the customer. They could assign some of the rebate to themselves. They could give it all as cash back to the customer. There's a bunch of different avenues there.
Okay, and is that for both of these? They're basically just saying that these are guidelines of how the change is measured, as opposed to and then the money itself is going towards enabling those changes,
Correct.
such as the home upgrades. Sorry. Mm-hmm.
That's right. So you'll measure, and there's various open source M&V methods that are out there today. Generally, the least common denominator is using monthly energy data. So we're talking about electricity, natural gas, and yes, even propane, other delivered fuel like diesel or fuel oil if you're in the Northeast. So all of that information will have to go into to this M&V method, and then you have to wait 12 months and see what the results are. And then if you see savings, then you can get paid. There's actually a threshold. I forget exactly the number. I think it's 30%. If you save more than 30% of energy, total energy usage, then you're entitled to a larger payment.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, the interesting part about the IRA is that this is going to drive demand for standardized electronic natural gas usage data. So I've typically focused on electric utilities, especially the smart meter thing is obviously only with electric utilities and desegregation and Wi-Fi and so forth. But the gas, you cannot get any money unless you have the gas information as well. So that's going to drive a lot of demand nationwide for gas utilities to provide streamline single click access to gas data.
Right on. Actually, yeah, you made me think of something else too, which is some of the work that I think Arcadia is doing as
Yep.
well to get this information. Does that differ from just pulling it directly from the smart meter, or is that kind of one and the same?
There's a couple of different ways you could get the information, and again, we're waiting for the DOE to give the guidance to the states on what they need to do. So it's possible, like I have a sub, because I'm an energy geek, and I have solar and I know sub meter, so I have a sub meter in my house and I monitor every circuit in my house. There's no reason why I couldn't use that circuit data to to facilitate my getting a rebate under the IRA. It doesn't have to be the utility meter. I mean, the IRA is silent on this topic. And we've advocated for basically a broad reading of the Section 501(21) of the IRA, which is the homes program, such that if a customer has their own measurement device, that should be acceptable. It should just be the utility meter. You can imagine, some complex like multifamily situations where like maybe the utility meter doesn't exactly capture the exact space where you've done the upgrade. So I think there's reasons for having a bit of flexibility there. But it is tricky though. If you're in like a multi-family setting and your natural gas provides heating, but it's distributed, you just pay like a flat monthly amount and it's not metered for you specifically. It might be a real challenge to get this rebate because you just don't know like what the actual energy demand is. So there's some challenges associated with that. What Arcadia and companies like Utility API are doing is they're facilitating getting your account and billing and usage data from your electric and gas utilities websites. That's great. What we've been advocating for from the beginning is an automated method by which the utility is really responsible for providing this standardized electronic access, rather than having to provide like my personal credentials to my utilities website to someone else to then access it on my behalf. And there's no like philosophical disagreement there. I think they can both coexist. I mean, that's exactly what we've seen in the banking sector, right? Is something like 50% of all transactions are now involving APIs between banks, and some of those are through the sharing of credentials, and some of those are done through basically native implementation by some of the larger banks like JP Morgan and Chase and so on. So my view is that ultimately the utility needs to be the one that's ordered to provide data portability, and that I would hope in a future, not too distant future, then you won't have to provide usernames and passwords, just because it'll be it'll work better. And in my mind, it's just part of being a utility in the 21st century is you got to support data portability natively.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Michael, I wanted to ask a follow-up on some of the disaggregation and like time series analysis that you were talking about. Like, who are the key players that are really like leading the charge on developing the software for that right now?
Good question. So there's a couple public announcements that have been made. I believe Bidgely and Sense are two of the companies that have announced with two different meter manufacturers in North America. There are other companies who do that, who do disaggregation. Sense is interesting because they have, I think it's like $300 for a device that you buy that it's basically a meter that you put in your electrical panel, and they'll measure at a high frequency, and they've been doing this high frequency disaggregation for a long time. Whereas my understanding is that Bidgely has traditionally done disaggregation based on the 15-minute usage data that's gone back to the utilities database. And so there's a real difference in sort of methodological approach of each of those. And one of the things that I've been pushing for, as of yet unsuccessfully, is that I think that the federal government ought to fund a test bed with like thousands of homes with high frequency information gathered, and in order for these algorithms to be tested against an objective ground truth data, essentially. And that would, I think, really help the industry move forward, because different companies claim mine is the most accurate, and another company says no, mine is more accurate, and it's really hard to judge those claims, because they're not, a lot of the underlying ground truth data is proprietary. So I do think there's a role for the government to get involved there.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, another cool potential is that the disaggregated insights, like it looks like your garage door just turned on, or it looks like your coffee maker just turned on. Those could be transmitted over Wi-Fi, and so you could imagine just like if this then that sorts of things, like if you're not home and this thing turns on, then send you an alert because something's wrong in your house. So there's a lot of potential there. The concerning thing is that the meter manufacturers seem to think that this is all their exclusive value to exploit. They don't really see it as part of a regulated asset that's subject to public utility commission oversight.
But if you have something like at the panel, there's not really a whole lot that the utility can do to like get in between that, can they?
Correct. If you install your own equipment, definitely there's really nothing that the utility can do. Yeah.
Can you see a world where homeowners could install their own smart meter? And I'm not talking about a sub meter, like having your actual meter owned by you.
I don't see that happening in North America. If you go into the history of the restructuring of the Texas market, that actually was what was considered in the mid 2000s, that you would have retail providers offering a better and better meter, and that so if I switched from one retailer to another, I could get the new retailer to put a brand new meter on my house with more capability that would do different things. And I think essentially what they found out is that, and granted, the equipment was a lot more expensive back then, but what they found out was that people just don't care that much. You're not gonna, you're very unlikely to, have consumer demand to, rip out something, turn off the electricity in your house in order to upgrade with some other, metering technology. And so, I know, there's places in Europe where the retailers are really taking the lead on the meter installation, and that's fine. But I just don't see, switch outs being that common. And that's why I think it's really important to have, open access to the infrastructure that has been installed, because, people don't really have any choice in that. A meter's, going to be on the side of your house for 15, 20 years or more. And functionally, I have zero choice over what that is. So the next best thing is to have choice over, my control over my data and choice over what apps get loaded onto the meter.
So I have a question along these lines. So with with so many smarts like moving into the house, behind the meter, smart panels, whatever, like all this data can be probably more accurately derived inside. I mean, not for every circuit yet, unless you have like a smart panel, but as time goes on, it seems like with the friction in getting the data out of the meter, the real source of this data might move. And I'm wondering if you're, to the inside, and I'm wondering if you're concerned about that, if that is a less, a less good solution to the general problem of getting electrical, data from inside about your house.
Yeah, so it's a great question. The way I think about this is that the utility. So let's break it into two. So there's the whole house consumption data, whole building, whole house data. And for participation in most wholesale markets, you have to have the utility meter data. That's the source of truth. And if you try to, this is not everywhere, not 100%, but 90+% of the time, if you go to the wholesale market and you say, look, I metered this myself, now pay me for my demand reduction, you will have 100 lawyers from the utilities and the other generators saying, no, that's illegal. You can't do that. Get out of here. There's only one source of truth. And I am very frustrated by this, but I think it's part of the political reality that, the utilities, the utilities control everything. And so it's going to be very, I applaud efforts of any entrepreneur to fight the fight with, ISOs and RTOs to get sub-meter data to be treated, on a level playing field with, utility meter data. I think that's great. But the reason why I've, chosen to focus on mission data for a long time is because no one else, everyone else was throwing up their hands and saying, oh, dealing with utilities is hard. I don't want to, it's hard to get data out of utilities. And I'm a former Silicon Valley person, so it's like I get the the sentiment of like, screw the utilities, let's just go our own way and like bypass them and make them irrelevant. And I, as someone who installed meters and sub meters and tried to bypass the utility for years and years and years, and I realized that is very, very hard to scale. And there's going to be a balance. If 20% of Americans got a smart panel, I would be absolutely elated. But then what about the other 80%? And I think for those, that's where you're going to have, you know, the utility meter data, even if it's less accurate than what the smart panel says, right? Even if it's worse, it doesn't matter, because that's the source of truth. That's how you get billed. That's how you settle in the wholesale market. And, you know, controlling, you know, when the utilities act as gatekeepers over that information, it's just, you know, it's almost like a clear pretext just to, you know, prevent competition that, you know, that the utilities don't like. So, you know, some companies in this space have fought very valiant battles against utilities who would say things like, oh, you can't use the data that you get from the bill pay website for settlement in wholesale markets. You know, PG&E, Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, they did this. They were telling, you know, some of the early demand response pioneers, you cannot use the data from the, you know, what customers pay their bill on to settle, because we have this extra secret special thing called revenue quality meter data, and only we have that, and we're gonna wield our power to prevent you from from having access to it. So like this is all just like within a very, very contested terrain of, you know, who has access to what, who has power over what. That's sort of the world that we live in. And, you know, in my view is that the faster we acknowledge that that's the world, rather than, you know, Pollyanna ideas about, you know, utilities are always, you know, good actors and, you know, it's always good faith and stuff like that. I think that the faster we move beyond that, the more we can like actually solve a lot of the problems that we have. Sorry, it's a long-winded answer.
James.
Yeah, hi, James.
Hey guys, sorry, I didn't mean to ask a question. Enjoying the content though. Apologies.
No worries.
In this case, Michael, are you familiar with DSGS, at demand side grid support program in CalISO?
Only vaguely.
The reason why I bring it up is because in order to get paid, you don't need to go through the meter anymore. You can provide your own data.
Yeah, that's great. I think that needs to, we definitely need more of that. I would also like choices for entrepreneurs. So some, you know, companies are going to be comfortable managing you know, like ANSI C12 metering standards and, you know, compliance with, you know, the ISO's, you know, telemetry guidelines and building that into their product and so forth. And then there's others who might just say, you know what, like, forget it. That's, you know, that's just kind of ridiculous. We're, you know, our expertise is more on customer engagement, and we want to do demand response, you know, behavioral demand response for a mass market, and just get the utility meter data, and not deal with the other, you know, the other pathway. So I think there's very legitimate, there's merits to both, and I think they should coexist. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of really interesting sub-metering, like around EVs specifically, right? And can you settle DR based on what the EV charger is measuring, or telematics from the vehicle, not necessarily the utility meter. And, you know, I was just on a phone call earlier today with the Massachusetts utilities, who did not like the idea of settling or you know, even billing a customer based on what the EV charger was measuring. They were dead set on installing a second revenue grade meter at significant expense to the customer, that they would wire their EV charger just into that meter. And it's like, you know, that's like $1,000 at least when it's all said and done, you know, rewiring and, you know, 200 plus bucks for the new electric meter, you know, new box, you know, truck roll, all this stuff. It's terrible. So I think that the pressure is going to be on more and more jurisdictions to adopt, you know, sub-metering, certain forms of sub-metering as legitimate, but it's going to be a fight, right? Because the utilities lose control whenever you're not, you know, dependent on them.
James.
Yeah. Hey, Michael. And guys, feel free to just say we already covered this and watch the transcript. I joined about 35 minutes late. And so, Michael, have you already covered like the process of, this is a VPP session, right? When a customer participates, like where is the actual like performance data posted and like what is posted and what's all the craziness of like, how you did and didn't perform, and how does that normally play out? If we're saying utility data is like the revenue grade, like standard and the source of truth. Maybe you already covered it though, so no worries if not.
No, I didn't actually, and that's a good question. So I think there's sort of two parts to that. There's the procedure of how do you get the customer's data? How do you present it to the ISO or RTO? But then the next question is like, how does baselining work in each of those RTOs? And so for actually both of those, we're, I hope, going to be working on a project to document those in the different, the 7 major RTO regions across the US, just to kind of have a broad picture of what the practices are and what the differences are between them. I think there's a lot of room for standardization and improving efficiency. I'd like to see a world in which, Nest thermostats or, ChargePoint EV chargers, regardless of these, arbitrary RTO boundaries that were decided like politically and which make no sense, like you should be able to, with roughly the same information, participate in KISO and in MISO and in PJM and in ISO New England. So there's a need, I think, for having greater clarity about those sort of settlement processes and baselining methods. So that's a little bit outside of our normal wheelhouse, but it's a project that I hope to be starting in the next couple of months. So anyway, you can check back with me next year on whether we've completed that assessment.
And conveniently, the next session is about measurement and verification with people from Recurve. So,
oh, excellent. Yeah, I was gonna mention them. I mean, this has come a really long way, both in terms of technology, but also in terms of standard setting and agreement. You can argue until the cows come home about counterfactuals, right? Because they didn't exist, and so you can argue forever about things that didn't exist. But they've done a good job of backing up with a lot of data, like approaches that are satisfactory, right, and that have broad agreement. And that's, anyway, I'm really impressed with what they've been able to accomplish, and I think bringing more of their intelligence to RTOs is going to be really valuable. There's some pretty simplistic baseline approaches that some of the RTOs use, and I'm just, I worry that is not going to be good for the industry.
All right, last question maybe.
Any good recommendations for a sub-meter product? I've just been Googling around and I found the Sense Energy Monitor, but I have no idea if that's, preferred or better.
It's good. I haven't used Sense personally. I have a couple friends who have it. It's, they're doing disaggregation, so they might, it might be accurate sometimes more than others. I personally have used eGauge more for commercial buildings. It's probably a little bit expensive for residential, but I've done that with CTs on every circuit. Yeah, there are quite a few now. Let me think. The commercial building world has quite a few of these, and you can it's all the same whether you have, whether it's, single phase or 3-phase power. What I did in my old company is we used the AquaSuite, which the company was called Obvious. It was then sold to Leviton, and that's a great device. It's got onboard Linux. It sends the data out to wherever you want on whatever frequency you want. So yeah, check out Leviton. That there's some good products there.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, but hopefully you won't even have to buy those products. You'll just be able to have the utility meter push out all the information that you need over Wi-Fi once you get the customer's permission. So that's my dream scenario.
Michael, how can one engage with or support Mission Data?
Yes, so thank you. I'll put my email up on the screen. Feel free to reach out. We're supported by about 28 or 30 members that represent all the different energy management companies. Everything from solar and batteries, demand response. So it's a pretty wide swath. We are also supported by foundations, but I love talking to entrepreneurs about what they're up to. We have a sort of sliding scale for membership dues. So if you're a really small company, don't be shy. Just shoot me a note, and hopefully we can work together. My view has always been that we just want the most number of companies to participate, regardless of their ability to pay. So.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for presenting today. It was super interesting. And thanks everybody else too for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
Sorry I
Michael.
couldn't get my video working, but hopefully next time.
No worries. All right. Have a great day.